Hey everyone, this is Chris Barnes, and you're listening to Read, Watch, Listen on the East Brunswick Public Library Podcast Network. Today we have a special guest who, for lack of better words, you could say is out of this world. He is the local NASA Solar System Ambassador. He's also the founder of the East Brunswick Astronomy Club. So I would like to introduce Isaac Osores. Isaac, how's it going today?
It's going great, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being on the show. Now, I'm sure all our listeners are wondering, how did you get to be a solar system ambassador, and did you get it sent out into space?
Not yet, but I'm still holding out hope. It's actually kind of funny. Back in 2019, I had saw a post of someone I follow. He's actually an amateur astronomer based out of Pennsylvania, and I've been dabbling in the hobby of amateur astronomy for a couple years and was following his account. I liked his post. We had the similar telescope, so I was trying to mimic, if he can get these views, I should be able to get the same. And it turned out he was the solar system ambassador, Marty McGuire. And around September timeframe, he posted a post saying, hey, if you're interested in becoming an ambassador, here's the link, apply at NASA and become a volunteer just like me. And so I kind of threw my hat in the ring and applied. They definitely called all the references. But sure enough, in 2020, I was inducted into the volunteer program.
That's very cool. So here's a related question. So in this hypothetical situation that you are our ambassador of our solar system to someone for something from the other side of the universe, what would you give them as a gift as representative? I mean, we'll be kind of short-sighted and say that Earth is just the only thing in our solar system, but what would you bring as a gift as a ambassador?
Such a great question. I'd want it to be something that represents hope and positivity. So my first thought would be probably a snack, and that might just be more of me coming off of lunch and craving something sweet, but something wholesome like an apple pie or something like.
It's a very good choice. So the other thing that you're known for is that you are the founder of the East Brunswick Astronomy Club. So how did you start that?
It actually came off a successful event at the library as an ambassador where it was around the October timeframe. We had a break in the clouds just right so that we could actually look at the moon through my Dobsonian telescope. And I left the event thinking how great it was that we got lucky with the break in the clouds. We were able to see the moon. But then also, how can I replicate this? How can we do this more often and more regularly? And the logical conclusion was, hey, this is what astronomy clubs do on a regular cadence. And then the question became, is there one in East Brunswick? And as far as I could tell, there was none. And so that's sort of how that evolved and became East Brunswick Astronomy Club.
Very cool. So we're going to get into the meat of the show, which is read, watch, listen. So we're looking for what you've been recommending so you can share it with our library patrons. So the first one, we're going to start with reading. Isaac, what have you read lately?
So lately, I actually visited the library and got a couple reference books because I'm a huge believer in having access to books, and what better place than a library for something like that. But then also to expand knowledge, right? So I did pick up two books to help further my knowledge in certain things, which were Sam's Teach Yourself SQL. So SQL is a database language and do use it regularly in my day-to-day job. And I was really looking just to brush up my skills a little bit, make things a little bit easier to the way I was doing things. The other book that I picked up was Starting and Building a Nonprofit, just because that whole realm and process is very foreign to me. It's something I've never done before, but similar to the creation of the East Brunswick Astronomy Club, incorporating it and having it become its own nonprofit is just another logical step in the process. And so that's something that we're currently looking.
So Isaac, are there any more books that you'd like to recommend?
Yes, there's actually one other one that I'd like to bring up, and it was actually recommended to me by a coworker who's a fellow programmer. It's called What If? Serious Scientific Answers to Absurd Hypothetical Questions. And so this book is by Randall Munroe. He may sound familiar if you're a fan of the XKCD webcomic. And so that webcomic is pretty popular. It has a lot of math, programming, and scientific in-jokes. But this book in particular, it actually started off as a blog, and each chapter covers an improbable scenario, but it uses physics and math and calculations to come up with a possible answer to those scenarios. And just to give you an example, the first chapter is actually titled, What Would Happen If You Tried to Hit a Baseball Pitched at 90% the Speed of Light? And so each chapter covers those questions that come up where maybe typically you wouldn't realistically look for an answer. Where here you have this curiosity of what would happen if you were to try to do such a thing. And so he takes into account the physics, the math, and comes up with a possible answer as to what that scenario would look like. And there's a bunch of similar scenarios throughout the entire book that that I found very, very entertaining.
Okay, that sounds like a good one. So next, let's talk about what have you been watching lately?
Sure. So when I was thinking of what I've been watching recently, I kind of came with the realization that I'm a huge creature of habit. I tend to rewatch a lot of shows that I've actually watched already, and I do love sci-fi, as you would expect, right? Being a NASA Solar System ambassador and a leader of an astronomy club. But lately, I just finished rewatching Battlestar Galactica. It's actually, I believe, my third rewatch of the entire series. And it just happened it was available to stream online. I almost feel overwhelmed when I see the options of things to watch on all the different platforms. So I saw this familiar title and just put it on and watched season after season. And so I just finished watching all four seasons of that show, and it lined up nicely. It's actually, I think last month was the 20th anniversary of the show. But for anyone who's not familiar, it deals with a human civilization attacked by an android race called Cylons that look human. And sort of your typical classic science fiction show. It has space travel and all the like. So that's kind of one of the main reasons why I like it a lot.
Now, are you a fan of the original Battlestar Galactica or just the more recent incarnation of it?
The more recent incarnation, I'll be quite frank and say that I haven't watched the original, but it is on my watch list to hopefully get through at some point.
You can find it on YouTube, but I guess during the peak of the original Battlestar Galactica, they had at Universal Studios in Los Angeles, they have the little studio tour, and they had a short-lived segment of it where your tram was attacked by Cylons, and there was smoke machines and lasers going off, and it is like the most absurdly late 1970s looking robot thing ever. And I wish it was still around to this day, and I feel like I missed out on a great experience.
That does sound pretty awesome. But that sort of retro look is sort of the allure of it, right?
Yeah. Oh, I know. I'm sure. But then it's also the other thing of it too is that like for the time this was state of the art, and now 40 some odd years later, like oh that's kind of lame. Is there anything else that you've been watching that you like?
Yeah. So actually, once I finished that rewatch, I did start my rewatch of the X Files. I'm currently on season 5, and this might be my fourth rewatch, which is a little sad to admit, maybe. But it's again one of those shows that I just really, really do enjoy. And it's kind of nice just to throw it on and maybe multitask or do something else because you kind of already know what's going to happen, but you still enjoy it.
No, I totally get that. It's safe watching. It doesn't require your full attention, and you always enjoy it. All right. So we did our read, we did our watch, and so what are you listening to? It could be music, it could be an audiobook, a podcast.
So I do listen to a ton of podcasts. They typically deal with some local comedians, especially the New York based comedians. There's one that I do like a lot, which is called We Might Be Drunk. And it's hosted by Sam Morril and Mark Normand, which are two of my favorite comedians at this time. And it's just funny to watch them cover topical things, but then also they have a couple segments in their show where they talk about maybe some bits that they're working on, and they sort of bounce things off each other, see if they work or not. And if you're lucky, you're able to actually see it come to life. You see them in person at a comedy show, which I had the chance to see Sam Morril at the Stress Factor in New Brunswick. There's another podcast that I pretty regularly listen to, which is the Waveform podcast. This one's hosted by Marquez Brownlee, David Amell, and Andrew Manginelli. And it deals with pretty much tech news, whether it's iOS, Android, what have you, the latest computers, gadgets, wearables, which are all things that I like to stay up to date on. But they also do have occasional bonus episodes. And one of the ones that I really liked recently was one where they covered what their favorite ordinary object was. So the key there was to introduce an object that is their favorite, but it has zero technology. So you can't power it on. It can't be digital. It has to be just a plain old object, and they have to explain why it's their favorite. So it's a bit of a departure of what they typically talk about, which was nice and refreshing. But then it was also funny. Tried to see each other, try to dismiss the object that they chose because it has certain features that may or may not be considered technology. So that particular episode was pretty fun.
Very cool. All right, Isaac, before we let you go, is there anything you'd like to plug or where can we find more information about you, your projects, EB Astronomy Club?
Yeah, so feel free to follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram. I'm 3D Astro Geek on those platforms, and I typically post things about space and anything I'm looking through my telescope or any 3D printing projects that I'm working on. But in addition to that, by all means, we'd love to have you at our East Brunswick Astronomy Club meetings. We meet every third Thursday of the month at the East Brunswick Public Library, typically 7 o'clock, but during the daylight saving time months, 7:30, just because sunset's a little later those months.
That makes perfect sense to me. Isaac, thank you so much for being on the show. For more great podcasts from East Brunswick Public Library, check us out on our website at ebpl.org/podcasts. And special thanks to our producer, Melissa Hozick. For East Brunswick Public Library, I'm Chris Barnes, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.